Hello, happy Saturday, everyone. Welcome to the Gifted Mindfulness Collective chat on embodied mindfulness and giftedness and mind-body connection. And I'm also going to be leading a guided meditation today on mind-body connection. So welcome. My name is Kelly. For those of you I haven't met before or maybe new to the Gifted Mindfulness Collective, welcome. I am going to begin with a couple of poems. So normally when I am, hi Jay, normally when I am leading meditation or mindfulness, we usually start, when everybody comes in to gather, we usually start by having tea together. We have a bit of a tea ceremony, and it's usually an opportunity to just kind of transition out of the mindset and the busyness of where you're coming from into this space where our intention is to be mindful and just to settle into the present moment. So in a virtual space like this, it's very difficult to do a hi Pierre. It's difficult to do a tea ceremony. So oftentimes I'll read poetry as a way of just shifting gears into more of a present moment mindfulness state. So as I was trying to find a couple of poems to start off today, there were so many good ones to choose from, and I couldn't decide. So I ended up landing on two that I'd like to share with you. And so I will read those, and you can just listen in, and you can close your eyes if you'd like. And again, just use it as an opportunity to kind of settle into the present moment and just be here in this space without all of the stories and ideas and to-dos and whatever else is floating around in your mind. Just allow those to settle and listen to these two lovely poems. So the first one is from Rumi. It's called Two Kinds of Intelligence. There are two kinds of intelligence. One acquired, as a child in school memorizes facts and concepts from books and from what the teacher says, collecting information from the traditional sciences as well as from the new sciences. With such intelligence, you rise in the world. You get ranked ahead or behind others in regard to your competence in retaining information. You stroll with this intelligence in and out of fields of knowledge, getting always more marks on your preserving tablets. There is another kind of tablet, one already completed and preserved inside you. A spring overflowing its spring box, a freshness in the center of the chest. This other intelligence does not turn yellow or stagnate. It's fluid, and it doesn't move from outside to inside through the conduits of plumbing learning. This second knowing is a fountainhead from within you moving out. And the second poem that I'd like to share is from Mary Oliver, and it's called Lingering in Happiness. After rain, after many days without rain, it stays cool, private and cleansed under the trees. And the dampness there, married now to gravity, falls branch to branch, leaf to leaf, down to the ground where it will disappear. But not, of course, vanish, except to our eyes. The roots of the oaks will have their share, and the white threads of the grasses, and the cushion of moss. A few drops round as pearls will enter the mole's tunnel, and soon so many small stones, buried for 1,000 years, will feel themselves being touched. So I share these two poems because I feel like they tie in very nicely to what we're going to be chatting about today, which is this shift from the thinking mind, which tends to dominate a lot of our present moments, a lot of our culture, a lot of our relationships, and this shift away from that into this other kind of intelligence, which is a body intelligence, a somatic intelligence. And I really love the way that Mary Oliver talks about this, just in terms of, this being married to gravity, and this idea of kind of sinking and dropping deep down into the places that we've, kind of buried for a long time, and sort of reconnecting with those. And this is a big issue for us as gifted people. And I'll just say up front, for anybody who, is listening to this recording afterwards, that when I talk about giftedness, I'm not referring to it in the very narrow sense of IQ, intelligence, how it's often traditionally been thought of, and still is in a lot of ways. I'm referring to giftedness in a more expansive, multi-dimensional kind of way. So it is, focused more on our way of experiencing the world, as opposed to just our level of IQ intelligence. So intensity and complexity, the multi-dimensionality. For many people, there's twice exceptionalities and multi-exceptionalities, where there can be overlap with, attentional issues, emotional issues, and just, all kinds of exceptionalities can kind of overlap. So it's this very multi-dimensional kind of thing, this idea of giftedness. So I just want to say that up front, that I'm speaking about giftedness from this much broader context. So when we start thinking about this idea of embodiment, because we've relied on this one form of intelligence, the form of intelligence that Rumi is talking about, the academic kind of intelligence, the thinking mind, and we've become very disconnected from our bodies. And so this idea of embodiment is really inhabiting the whole self, reconnecting the brain and the body, and being able to inhabit the whole of our being. So being open and aware to the richness of our whole being in a skillful way, because sometimes we can be open to the richness of this experience, but it can be very overwhelming, especially when you start thinking about sensitivities and intensities. It can be really overwhelming. And so embodiment is very closely tied to mindfulness for me, because mindfulness is about developing the skills in awareness so that you can be with what you're experiencing with equanimity. So by maintaining some kind of stability and balance, and not being overwhelmed by this inner experience. And so this idea of embodiment, then, it's this reconnection of the mind, or the brain and the body, the mind and the body, in a way that we are experiencing ourselves as whole, living, breathing, feeling, knowing, as well as thinking and problem-solving beings. It's all of this, and we need to be able to hold all of that. And as we well know, for gifted people, there's a lot to hold. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's very, hi Merlin, it's very complex, and it can be very overwhelming. So this idea of embodiment is being able to hold all of that in a skillful way. And so when we start talking about, this mind-body connection, we start talking about somatic intelligence. This is the other kind of intelligence that Rumi is talking about in the poem about, the two kinds of intelligence. We have this whole other level of body intelligence. Hi, Karen. That we're just completely unaware of and disconnected from and cut off from. And so when we start, I love this idea of somatics too, because I think for a long time, and we still do, we've thought about the body as sort of an object, a very mechanical kind of thing that is a tool. And when we start talking about somatic intelligence, the soma is, this is such a beautiful word, and it's this idea of the body is much more than an object and just this mechanical tool. It's this living, breathing organism that is rich with information. It feeds us information about our biological needs, hunger, fatigue, illness, all of those kinds of biological things. It feeds us information about our safety, about threats in our environment. It feeds us with, all of our feeling, the whole spectrum of feeling, love, belonging. All of that comes from the soma. And, our sense of self develops from our somatic experience. Intuition, empathy, compassion, all of these things are really deeply tied to our somatic intelligence. And so starting to develop that somatic intelligence is really key to embodiment and being able to hold and connect and be aware of the entirety of our beings. Oh, let me see. I see lots of. Oh, Catherine is here too. Hi, Catherine. Feel free. I will say feel free to jump in with insights or comments or questions or anything as I'm talking. It's called a chat, but as you know, it's an unorthodox kind of a chat because you're texting and I'm speaking. But please feel free to jump in with comments and questions and anything that you'd like to add. Think of it as a chat. So we're talking about this mind-body connection, developing somatic intelligence. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this disconnection, because, and I mentioned a little bit already that this idea that culturally, we've started to think of we have and continue to think of the body as this machine, kind of mechanical tool. And I actually heard a really funny reference to the body the other day as, what was it? A brain taxi, that the body is a brain taxi. It's just kind of this instrument for carrying the thinking mind around. And it's really what has happened culturally for sure. We think about technology, how much that has disembodied us, education, sports, we're using the body, but it is very much in the body is a tool. It's just, we have to figure out how we're going to do this many reps of this and feed the body this many vitamins so it does what we want it to do and can compete. And, and we've gotten very good at that, but we are not connected we're not embodied in a somatic and whole being kind of way. And even in education, if you have kids, this will be fresher in your mind, but for sure you probably remember growing up that any kind of physical activity was kind of an extra add-on thing. Everything is about math and reading and, learning all the basics for the thinking mind. And then physical activity, dance, even recess, all of these things where we're using the body were extras. And those were the first things that always get taken away from kids. If you're misbehaving, we're taking away your phys ed because it's sort of like a treat. And so we've just, come to think about the physical body as just this add-on, and the thinking mind has really been what has dominated. The workplace, the same thing in terms of being disembodied. We're sitting a lot now in the workplace and not being embodied. And then, of course, stress and trauma, which is so prevalent. And those things really serve to disconnect us from our bodies. And it's in a protective way, but it still disconnects us in a way that we end up being stuck in our thinking mind. And so culturally, we have all of this, and then you factor in giftedness and twice exceptionality, multi-exceptionality, all of these pieces that, lead us to experience life very intensely, sensitively. We have these overexcitabilities that are not just intellectual, that are in the body, that we feel sensorially, emotionally. There's like a whole complexity that comes with that as well. And, for so many of us, the other piece of that I didn't mention was that, we're in the minority as well in having all of these intensities and overexcitabilities of our inner experience. And so as we're, growing up and learning and developing and growing, and taking in all of this information from the world, these disconnects start to happen, where we have all of this emotional intensity, sensory intensity that we see that other people don't seem to have in the same way. And we never learn or have role models. Many of us growing up did not have role models for learning for mirroring that intensity to us and allowing us to figure out how to manage all of that in a skillful way. And so for many of us, this experience of this too muchness that comes in our inner experience, and that gets mirrored from other people, we see and get this sense of this too muchness. So we start stuffing things away. Again, this is our systems, our body, our mind and body's way of protecting us and allowing us to survive is, okay, I'm going to tuck this away for you so that, you can put your energy into focusing on how to function and be within the rest of this group that seems to operate differently. And so, that's how the disconnect starts. We start stuffing a lot of this away, compartmentalizing a lot of our emotionals and sensory information, because we just have never learned how to manage it or figured out what to do with it in a skillful way. And intellectual overexcitabilities can be the same thing. We have to learn how to tone those down a little bit. Oftentimes it's paired with emotional, psychomotor overexcitabilities. And so the too muchness comes out of it. And it's this idea of, just kind of tone it down and so that, we can fit in. There's a lot of stress that comes with all of that toning down and fitting in. And it requires a lot of energy to contain all of that intensity. And I have two kids who have different types of intensities, but I remember when they were younger, just having to, and you might remember this for yourself, or if you have kids, you might see this, where they spend so much of their day at school or in after school activities, whatever it is that they're doing, having to contain all of this intensity and all of this complexity, having to contain it so that they can sit and do what they need to do without getting into trouble. And that requires so much energy. And I remember when my son in particular would come home at the end of the day from school, and he would just be so done, and he would literally be on the floor because it was just this release of all of this tension from having to contain all of this all day. And he would literally be on the floor. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what is happening? That, he feels the need to do this when he comes home, but it's this idea of containing all of this. It requires so much energy, which is really exhausting. And you think that many of us go through school, we go through adolescence, we go through, the early adult years, and, for myself, through the later adult years as well. And we're just containing all this, and we've just not learned what to do with it. We've disconnected from it and kind of stuffed it all away. So yeah, I mentioned this idea of trauma that can come from a lot of this, because there's this, when we have the lack of mirroring, when we feel like we're not belonging and we're not fitting in, when we're misunderstood, a lot of people are misdiagnosed. And so that leads to a whole other set of experiences, and just this general feeling of too muchness. It ends up, because we have all of this energy that is not being processed and that is so difficult, that gets stored in the body. And unless that gets released, which only happens through trauma therapy, or going through the work that needs to be done to process all of that, it gets stored there. That takes a lot of energy for our bodies and our minds and our system to contain all of that, because our bodies and our minds will work very hard to make sure that we survive. And so it will contain all of that for us. And it really does a phenomenal job of doing that when you think about it. But when you go through life with this feeling of your whole self not being able to express itself, and there's this sense of it not being okay as it is, and that we have to contain it. There's kind of like this square peg in a round hole phenomenon that gets experienced. So if you think of much of society, education, when we're growing up, and then workplaces, and just everything that has to do with our societal structures, being designed as round holes. And when you're a square peg that is designed a little bit differently, not in a better way, not in a worse way, but just in a different way, and there's this lack of fit, where our systems are constantly looking for ways to make us fit, because that's how we survive. This idea of belonging is, wired into us. It's an evolutionary, biological, built-in wiring that we're social beings and we need to fit in. And so our system will take over and do things to help us do that. Oftentimes it's outside of our awareness. And so if you imagine this idea of being a square peg having to fit into this round hole, there's this sense of, okay, if I just tuck this edge in, and I tuck this edge in, and this one, I can sort of make this work. I can sort of make this fit into this round hole. And the image that always comes to mind for me when I think of this square peg in a round hole and trying to make it fit is Spanx, which for anybody, Spanx is SPANX, which I don't know if everywhere in the world has these things, but we have them in North America. And it's this undergarment that you wear, that's, if you want to wear clothing that is really fitted and you don't want to have anything poking out to where it's not supposed to, and you want to like fit into this very fitted piece of clothing, you put this undergarment on and it sort of sucks everything in. It's super tight. It's like I guess sort of like a corset, but you can get like full body ones, and it just sucks everything in and makes it fit. And so I often think about this idea of, trying to hold in our intensities and our complexity. It's almost like we have to put on these Spanx to suck everything in and make it fit. And so thinking about it metaphorically this way, it's, if I've tried these on before. I've never owned Spanx. I've tried them on before, and they're just awful because you can't breathe, you can't move. It's like you're like robotic almost. I don't know how people pull them off, but it's almost like life in these Spanx, where we have to like pull everything in, and so this is where our whole self. This is how we become disembodied, because our whole self never gets a chance. This fountainhead that moves from the inside out that Rumi was talking about in the opening poem that I read, it never gets to come out because it's always, has to be tightly contained for safety, survival reasons. And so we become very disembodied over the years, having to, squish ourselves into these very tight, constrictive ways. And I'm talking about this metaphorically, but our body actually does this. As it holds in stress, as it holds in trauma, and holds in all of these overexcitabilities, there's a constriction and a tension that happens in the body in order to make this happen. And we just don't realize it over time, that this has happened. And, I know for me in my own journey, I didn't find out about being gifted until I was in my 40s. And, we started uncovering giftedness in my family. And, that was really when I started to reflect on how I had been functioning over the years, and realized how tightly contained I had to keep myself in order to function. And I functioned pretty well, but it was at the expense of keeping everything compartmentalized and very tightly contained. And in fact, when I first started doing gifted coaching with Jennifer Harvey-Sallin through Intergifted, one of the things we sort of laughed about, and I didn't realize it, but the website that I had at the time for the coaching work that I was doing was full of all these little boxes. I had all of these little boxes, and it was almost like that was myself reflected through my website. I had just had to put myself in all of these little boxes, so very disconnected and tightly contained. And so I, got into mindfulness mainly because I wanted to figure out my mind, first of all, because it was, I was having a really hard time managing intensity. My inner experience was just so overwhelming for me. And I was really worried about my mental health. And so having had tried everything else, I ended up finding my way into mindfulness and meditation. And the combination of that and understanding giftedness was really helpful for me in starting to get some peace of mind, and enabling to be with my mind in a skillful way, in a way that just wasn't overwhelming me all of the time. But I did that for many years. I learned mindfulness and developed mindfulness skills, but there was still, at one point, I got to sort of a plateau, I guess, in mindfulness practice, where I realized I was focusing on everything up here, the intensity, and yes, it helped with some intensity in my body as well, but I just started to realize how disconnected I was from my body. And what started happening to me, this is going back a couple of years now, but I started, even just in everyday movement, I would start tripping, and my foot would catch on things while I was walking that just seemed really weird for me. And I started thinking back to my training in kinesiology, where when you would work with elderly people, they would often have falls because of the proprioception in their feet, the sense of proprioception in their feet would start to not function as effectively. And so when they would step on a change from a carpet to a hardwood floor, or just a change in the surface texture, the proprioception senses in their feet wouldn't pick this up, and so they would lose their balance and fall. And that's what I started feeling like was happening to me, and I would not consider myself an elderly person. So it was very, it was just all of these little clues that started coming up for me about how disconnected I was from my body. In mindfulness practices, there's a traditional practice called a body scan. And when somebody would be leading one of these body scans, usually I had a lot of resistance towards it. I did not enjoy doing them. I would try to avoid them at all costs. And I thought it was because I just thought they were incredibly boring, which they were, because I had such a lack of disconnection to my body that I didn't really get much out of them. And then I think the turning point for me was a couple years ago. I tripped and I fell, and I had this really bad shoulder injury. And all of these things started coming together, and I thought, I am just so disconnected from my body, and I need to figure out how to get back into it and reconnect with it and listen to what's going on in there, because I knew there was a lot more happening that I just was not aware of. And so that, led into a whole long process for me of processing trauma. I did a lot of, work trying to process trauma. And again, it wasn't really, I wasn't in abusive situations. I didn't experience anything that people would typically think of as traumatic, like really violent things, but it was just the trauma of not fitting in and having to contain myself, not having mirroring, and not being able to express the wholeness of myself, and feeling like there was something that was not okay with the wholeness of myself. And so I had to, start from, doing what Mary Oliver talked about in her poem, where I thought, okay, I'm going to marry gravity and sort of go deep down. And, I worked with some really great teachers, and I had great coach through Gifted with Jennifer Harvey Sallin, and, just step by step, starting to reconnect and reintegrate what was going on up here with what was going on in the rest of my body. And so that's, all of that work, it's, I think back now to what it was like being so disconnected, and I remember it quite well, and I feel like I'm in a very different place now. Doing embodied mindfulness for me has been like coming home. And I use that term a lot in my work. It's like a coming home to yourself. It's like a coming home to your whole self. Yeah, reconnecting with your body. And it's like, oh, there's this whole being that's here that I just was not aware of. And so that, doing this embodied mindfulness course, when I put this together, I wanted this to be the next extension of the mindfulness work that I've been doing over the last couple of years with gifted people, to start being able to expand our awareness from just what's going on in the mind, and being able to, manage that with, let's expand that now. Let's expand our awareness into our wholeness and connect with the body, because mindfulness is full awareness, and it's not full awareness if we're just, focusing on our thoughts and even feelings as they're connected to thought up here. And so I wanted to be able to, one of the things with doing this work and going deep into the body is it's vulnerable work. It requires a lot of courage, and it needs a safe space in which to begin experimenting. We've had these, going back to my metaphor of the Spanx, we've had this around us, and it's been like this armor to protect us and keep us safe to be able to function in the world. And so it's a very vulnerable thing to start peeling this off, because our experience has been, when we allow our whole self to come out, there's the reaction of the too muchness. So being able to come into a safe space with other gifted people who are, trying to work through all of the same things, just gives you this kind of safe space in which to feel like it's okay to be vulnerable and to experiment a little bit and to just, slowly peel back a layer of something and play around with that and see what it's like with other gifted people who are going to know, oh yeah, no, I recognize that. You get the mirroring from other people who are not going to look at you like you have two heads, or like, what is happening. We're all in the same boat, and we're all, kind of working through all of this together. So that's one of the things that I've really loved about the mindfulness work that I've been doing over the last couple of years, is just this idea of a safe space where we're face to face, connecting with each other and experimenting with one another, because so many of us have just not had that. So beginning to start dismantling some of this armor and learning how to manage what does it feel like when these overexcitabilities come up, really becoming attuned with what is happening in our mind and in our body when these overexcitabilities come up. Because for the most part, we work in the extremes. They either come full out and there's the too muchness, or we have to pull it all back in to, keep it reined in. And so it's finding the middle path for our overexcitabilities. How can we manage these in a skillful way so they're not, just exploding, and we're not having to restrict them? How can we start to experiment and working with them in skillful ways? How can we begin listening to what's going on in our bodies? In the poem I read from Mary Oliver, this idea that these stones that have been buried for so many years, we start to touch on these things, and it's sort of like all these little aha moments where we go, oh my gosh, yeah, there's this that's here. And we're doing it in a space again where you have a lot of support, and you can start to just connect with these things in a safe way and have the tools for when you experience them. Okay, what do I do with this? How do I work with this? Again, working with all of these little things in a skillful way. And so this is how we move from vulnerability to developing this courage. We start using these little tools. We start developing some skill around managing all of these things. And then we start to feel a little bit more courageous, to experiment a little bit more, and maybe to go outside of the gifted space and just experiment a little bit in the workplace, in a social setting where, you can sort of recognize, okay, this is how this feels, this is how I can manage that. And, there's a lot of trial and error that happens with this experimentation. But again, for the most part, when we're doing it in this safe space of the group, it really allows us to, just work with these things in a way that we've not been able to in a very long time. So there's elements also around, when we talk about embodied mindfulness, this idea of starting to feel safe in our bodies, because our emotional intensities our sensitivities can be very overwhelming. And then of course, stress and trauma and all these things can lead us to feel very unsafe in our bodies and not grounded. And so, being able to develop some tools for starting to, and again, experimenting with starting to feel safe and starting to feel grounded and okay in this wholeness. Boundaries is another thing that is really important to develop as part of embodied mindfulness, because when we've been disembodied and when we've had a lot of these relational mismatches as gifted people, we can lose, not necessarily lose, but never develop the ability to create healthy boundaries. And so, part of embodied mindfulness is, how can we start to feel safe and grounded in our body? And then how can we start to develop these healthy boundaries? What does that feel like? And again, just experimenting with and reflecting on, the whole of our inner experience, and having tools that we can draw on to manage that when it's, starts to feel overwhelming for us. And then the other thing that I think is really important to keep in mind too is that, embodied mindfulness is not just around healing things. There's an element of it that is reconnecting with our joy of being, reconnecting with our gifts, and our strengths. Things that we've had to keep tucked in very tightly to feel safe. How can we reconnect with those things and feel okay with them? And again, it's finding a middle path for expressing these things. So we're not feeling like we have to tuck it away or just let it all out. We can have these things come through us in authentic ways and skillful ways, so that it's not overwhelming, so that it's not a too muchness, so that it's a just rightness that is, authentic. And, that's one of the things that I really love about embodied mindfulness, and is about befriending ourselves and finding compassion for ourselves so that we feel good about and safe about being able to express ourselves in authentic ways, and just feeling good in the whole of ourselves again. So I think that's really important to mention too, this idea about oh my gosh, here I am, I'm like talking, and I'm not realizing that my scrolling thing on the side doesn't move on its own. So I'm stuck at the top thinking, okay, nobody's talking, but there's all these comments. And so I apologize, because I've been like going on, and people are inserting their comments. So let me go back a little bit. I will stop and take a breath. So Pierre has said, a form of repeated trauma on the body, especially for a gifted person's experience, be more sensitive, leading to a sort of disconnect more and more over the years, which creates the alienation. Yeah, absolutely. And and it's the mind and the body that is, built this armor up around that. So, and then that feeling of, if my whole self, if I have to armor my whole self this way, it must not be, there must be something alien about it. That's what it ends up feeling like. And Junior's here, and Eric's here, hi. Oh, and Jennifer's here, hello. Oh, Eric knows Spanx. Okay, I don't know if it's a North American thing, the Spanx. Okay, so people are laughing at the Spanx. People know Spanx. Yes, Merlin doesn't understand Spanx, but it sounds really uncomfortable. They're super uncomfortable. I don't know how people wear these things, but Yeah, it's a fashion thing. Yeah, body armors, yes. And I can't remember if I've mentioned this word armoring, but yeah, you know, the metaphor of the Spanx is, it's like a form of keeping everything tucked in, but it's a protection too. And yes, and I see Eric's mentioned self-containment. Yes, a constriction of life force and life experience, normalized in westernized societies, yet ultimately intolerable for gifted folk. Yes, that's beautifully said. Thanks, Eric. Okay. Karen has said, and I can't see how long ago these things are posted. So again, I really apologize. If you said this like 40 minutes ago, I've been talking this whole time. I may be jumping ahead here, so feel free to cover this where it fits. Proprioception, yeah, it makes me think about my own issues with proprioception and sensory motor processing, which leads me to think about the neurodiversity component. Yes, to many of us, to E people, what are your thoughts about it? About if how embodiment plays out differently, uniquely for gifted 2E folks. Yeah, yeah, proprioception and sensory motor issues. Well, I think, yeah, going back to some of the things that, and maybe I've covered this now again, I don't know how far back you mentioned this, Karen. But yeah, I think it does play out differently because we just experience things so much more intensely. And so there's this constriction that happens in the system, which is, you know, as soon as we become disembodied, as soon as we become constricted, we're cutting off the ability for all of these systems to integrate and function smoothly and efficiently. So it's going to lead to things like sensory motor issues and proprioceptive issues, just because we've disconnected from it. You know, and I think it's the mind-body thing for sure that ends up, you know, being really affected. You know, going back to the proprioception and sensory motor, but we even know like our intellectual capacities can get affected by trauma. Right? So like just the very function of how trauma and stress and all of the stress chemicals get released in our body, like all of this disintegration happens. You know, that's one of the fallouts. Dan Siegel talks about this a lot in his work, this disintegration of all of these systems. And that's one of the really amazing things about mindfulness. And there's still, you know, we're still in the early stages of understanding how this reintegration happens, but mindfulness work and practice helps with this reintegration of all of these systems. You know, again, I'm not sure, you know, some of these things can be developmental, you know, asynchronicities could play into this. There could be developmental things as well. That would happen a little bit, that would have happened a little bit differently than from the results of trauma, but how we work with these things, I think, is very similar. So yeah, I think the disintegration would be a really big thing that happens with gifted and 2E folks because of the stress and trauma that we tend to experience. Oh, Eric had to go. So he probably didn't hear. Oh, thanks, Karen. Did I answer your question about the proprioception and the sensory motor issues? I hope that I answered that, or at least gave a little bit of something to think about it in a bit of a different way or in a helpful way. Okay, so I wanted to say, I think I've got through all the comments now. Oh, disintegration. Okay, good. Scroll. I'm gonna have to make put a little sticky on my computer to remind me when I do these things to scroll, because the comments don't just pop up. Note to self. Okay, I wanted to come back a little bit to this idea of wholeness, because I've mentioned it, and when we talk about embodiment and embodied mindfulness, it's this inhabiting of the whole self. And oftentimes when we talk about wholeness, there's this idea of having to work towards it, that it's something that we don't have and we need to get. There's this idea of having to fix things, this idea of brokenness. And, I think this stems a lot from the medical model that is just where our culture is and has grown from, this idea of that we fix things. And, some of hi Philip, thanks for joining. A lot of the work that's coming out now, which I love, and this is, really the place that I come from, this idea of wholeness is something that we already have. It's not something we need to get. It's not something we have to fix this, and then we'll, be at this place of wholeness. Wholeness is something that we already have. We've just disconnected from it. And it's very easy to disconnect from it, when we start talking about intensities and overexcitabilities. The shadow side of intensities and overexcitabilities can really take over, and it can be easy to get lost in the shadow side of those intensities and forget that we have this wholeness that's already there. And so it's a matter of, reconnecting with that. Krista Tippett, who does the On Being podcast, she did a really wonderful interview with Rachel Naomi Remen. And, one of the things that Rachel Naomi Remen commented on during the course of this interview was that wholeness is never lost. It is only forgotten. And so for me, this is a really key part of mindfulness work, embodied mindfulness work, is just this wholeness is already there, and it's just a matter of reconnecting to it. So what I would like to do is lead you through a bit of a guided meditation, which is designed to help to restore the mind-body connection, as well as reconnect with this idea of wholeness that's already there. That it's not lost, it's just forgotten. And so hopefully this guided meditation can help you get a little bit of a taste of that. So I'm going to, unless there are any other comments or questions, I'm scrolling. I'm not seeing anything. So I will invite you to just get yourself into a comfortable position. This meditation will be maybe about 10 minutes, just so you have an idea on timing. If you have to go, it'll be about 10 minutes. So just, I'll invite you to get into a comfortable seated position. So, you're feeling comfortable and at ease, and your body is upright. And we're going to start this meditation with eyes open, and just begin by examining your hands. So we're just noticing the shape, noticing their size, skin tone, noticing the texture. There's really interesting textures when you look at your hands close up. Notice the edges and the boundaries of your hands. And you might gently rub your fingers together and rub your hands together and just notice what your hands feel like. So then just gently now placing your hands in your lap or just someplace in front of you that feels comfortable. And I'll invite you to gently close your eyes, or you can partially close them, whatever feels right for you. And with your attention still directed into your hands, notice the sensations in your hands. What do you feel? You might feel a slight tingling or a pulsing. Maybe there's a sense of warmth. You might feel a sense of aliveness. So this energy, this is your life force. And we can use this energy as a kind of anchor to stay present, to move out of the intensity of the thinking mind. And if my reference to the thinking mind caused yours to come back online, you can just notice it. Say hello. It's just doing what it's designed to do. And you can gently bring your attention back to the sensations in your hands. And then we can try expanding this awareness by shifting your attention into your arms. So moving your attention from your hands, directing it up the length of your forearms, noticing the sensations in your forearms, directing your attention through your elbows, and up through your upper arms, and into your shoulders. And just sense the wholeness of both of your arms at once. The whole of your arms all at once. Experiencing the sensations that make up your arms. Now see if you can expand your awareness to include the entire body at once. So your arms, your torso, your legs and feet, your neck and head. Just begin to sense and feel your entire body. Sensing it all at once as a wholeness of sensation. We're not trying to change anything or analyze anything. We're just welcoming and noticing all of the sensations that are present. And just take your time as you settle into this ease of being. Just allow your awareness to rest in this state of being. When you're simply being, notice how you begin to feel in your body. You might notice a sense of peace or ease, maybe well-being when you're resting in this awareness. Being has a quality of presence about it, where you're fully here. And there's also a spaciousness about this being when all of our senses are open. See if you can notice the spaciousness. The spaciousness around you, just kind of as an openness that's emanating from you. So there's this element of both being centered and present in the body and an open, expansive spaciousness that emanates from the body. We can be both grounded and open. As you rest in being, does this sense of being need anything? Right now, in this moment, does this presence want or lack anything? You might notice a sense of being that is beyond want or lack. There's a presence that is complete and whole, just as it is. So as we begin to recognize and reconnect with this presence, we also reconnect with our wholeness. A wholeness that's always there, that's always been there. It's just like the breath and the beating of your heart. It's always there. As we come to the end of the meditation and begin to bring our attention back to this space, try to maintain this embodied awareness, knowing that you can connect with this state of being and wholeness at any time. And when you're ready, you can come back to our Facebook space and open your eyes. We'll just take a moment to stretch and maybe just reflect on that experience a little bit, and then feel free to share any reflections or insights, questions that you have about that. Marilyn says, cool. Did that just pop up? There's no timing that shows on the comments as they come up. So I'm not sure how long that was there. Was that during? Was that after? I'm going to assume that that was in reference to the meditation. So I hope that, if in doing this meditation, if you go through the guided meditation and you didn't feel anything, that's totally normal. That's how I got into doing this work, because I would go through these guided meditations and I would feel nothing. And it was like, I started to feel like the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz, where it's like, oh my gosh, I have no feeling. So if you didn't, happen to feel anything, don't worry about that. That's totally normal. And even if what you noticed was like really, really, really subtle, subtle can be very significant. And that's how we start making these connections. How we start doing this reconnection is just noticing these subtle things. And that's, really important, especially when we're talking about somatic intelligence, that it's very, very subtle. And so tuning into these subtleties is part of developing the intelligence. And, like anything, the more you do it, the more attuned you become to it, the more aware you become of it. And, the less subtle it becomes. Oh, that was when I was going to do it. Oh, okay. Oh, Karen loved the experience. Katya says it's interesting that the head was difficult to connect to the body. Oh, you felt body more than head. Okay. Okay. That's, yeah, that's interesting because, and totally normal too, because so much of the body, what we experience there is feeding things back up to the brain. And sometimes if we're not used to, having these pathways working and integrated, it can be hard to connect it to the head. But, if you're feeling things in the body, that's a really wonderful start. Oh, Kira's blown away. I felt like Harry Potter when he puts on the invisibility cloak, like I was see-through. Oh, that's amazing. Oh, I love that, Pierre. Yeah, and I can totally see and appreciate how you could get that sense in doing this practice. Oh, thanks for sharing that. Catherine says, lovely. Merlin got interrupted midway from the doorbell, so I'll come back to it later when the recording is done. But what I got was lovely. Okay, wonderful. So, yes. So if you felt disconnections there, that's part of the journey. And if you got a lot out of it, like Pierre commented with the feeling like the Harry Potter, this is the stuff that we've disconnected from, and that's all the good stuff that is there that's just waiting for us to connect with it. And I hope you were able to get this sense of wholeness too, that it's not something we have to strive towards, it's something that's already there. And it's just a matter of being able to tune into it. I, many years ago, this is going back to the 1990s, or as my kids would say, way back in the 1900s. I was listening to this this speaker who is from my area in Toronto, and it was one of the first times I ever went to see a speaker. And she told this story about, she was shopping and she was in this little gift shop, and she found this little ceramic angel that she just it really jumped out at her, and she really kind of fell in love with it and was contemplating buying it. And she looked at the price tag and it said that it was 50% off, as is. And so she was looking at it thinking, okay, it must be broken. Let me see if I still want to buy it, or if it's something, that's very, very small and not noticeable. So she's looking at this ceramic angel, looking, not seeing anything, not seeing any damage, not seeing any cracks, nothing. So she takes it to the clerk who's working in the store, and she says, I would like to buy this angel, but it says that it's on sale and it's as is, but I don't see anything wrong with it. I don't see it broken or cracked anywhere. And so the store clerk takes the angel and she's looking at it and she's examining it, and she can't find anything. And she sort of just shrugs her shoulders and says, well, if it says it's broken, it must be broken. And she shared this story with us. And right after she shared this story, she just kind of really resonated with a lot of people. It resonated with me. And she just kind of paused as she was telling the story, and she said, you are not broken. And I remember that was like one of the first times where somebody said something that just really, I was in my 20s at the time, it just resonated with me so deeply. And, maybe you're at a point where you've, come to that realization. But if it's helpful for you to hear this idea of you're not broken, that your wholeness is already there. It's not lost. It's not something that you have to put back together. It's just forgotten. And, it's just a matter of reconnecting with that. So I hope that guided practice gave you an opportunity to experience that. Just a couple last things that I'll mention. I'll keep scrolling to see if people are making comments. I'm going to keep up. So, in terms of the Embodied Mindfulness course, they're not all guided meditations like this. There are a couple of practices that are guided meditations, but for the most part, we're doing a lot of movement-based practices, not yoga, not movement in that way. And it's not that I have anything against yoga. I'm just not trained in yoga. So, the stuff that I've incorporated into the course and that I'll be teaching, it's not yoga based, but it's very movement based. It's very practical, and that gets married in with a lot of, talking about the neurobiology of the gifted mind and body, very much like I was talking about today, but, going deeper into that and expanding on that, going down that rabbit hole, and so that, we can understand that. But then, marrying that with these practices of being able to work with the body and start to, dismantle some of this armor in safe ways, and, find ways where we can start being able to reconnect with this wholeness and being able to express ourselves through this wholeness. And I do the same as I did today. For those of you who came in late, I started off this chat with 2 poems as a way of kind of just becoming mindful and settling into the present moment. And I do incorporate a lot of poetry into my courses. So there's lots of poetry that happens as well. If there is something that you would like to explore with me around participating in the Embodied Mindfulness course, please feel free to contact me. I'll put my contact information in the comments, but feel free to contact me if you want to explore anything, or if you have questions that you don't feel comfortable asking in the space, or if things come to you later. I'm really happy to schedule a 20-minute exploratory chat with you at no cost, like just to answer your questions and just explore how this might be a fit for you. And the other thing is too, I always want people to know that if finances are an issue, please reach out to me around that too, because I would hate for somebody to feel like, I would really feel like I would benefit from this course, but I can't afford it. Reach out to me and we can work something out. I'm happy to do that. And I think that's everything that I wanted to say. Talked about all of the, I think I covered everything. And again, I apologize. Here I am saying at the beginning of the chat, ask questions, make comments, and let's make this a chat. Oh, learning lesson. So I thank you for being here today. And if you, listen to this recording at another time, I hope you're able to take away a few things that are helpful for you on your gifted journey. And I am going to sign off now, and I'm going to take Mary Oliver's advice. Again, if you joined us late, I read a poem from Mary Oliver called Lingering in Happiness. And so I am going to take Mary Oliver's advice, and I'm going to go outside for a walk and enjoy the beautiful day that we're having here in Toronto. And I am going to linger in happiness, and I wish the same for you. So again, thanks for being here, and have a great day. Bye.